go ahead and get recording started. Now that we've gotten that started, I will go ahead and introduce myself and want to say welcome, bienvenidos. My name is Tanya. My pronouns are she, ella. I am the fund's grant programs manager. It's really, really nice to be in this space with you all tonight. I'm really grateful for you all spending this hour with us this evening. Great to see some familiar names and faces. Great to see some new names. I'm excited to get to know you all and learn more about the work that you all are doing. I do have one of my colleagues here with me that I'm going to hand it off for her to be able to introduce herself as well.
Hi, my name is Danielle Bollinger. I'm the grants associate at the Fund for Santa Barbara. This December will be my first year at the fund, and this is my second racial equity grant cycle. So I'm very happy to be here and to be of support.
Awesome. Thank you, Danielle. And for those of you who came in a little bit later, we did mention earlier, questions are welcome at any point throughout the presentation. Feel free to either put those in the chat, come off mute, or raise your Zoom hand, whatever feels most comfortable to you. And the other thing I had mentioned was that we are asking folks to introduce themselves in the chat, either add your name, your pronouns, the group or organization that you're representing. And as folks are doing that, we're encouraging folks to take a look at who's in the room and see if there's space or opportunity for networking or collaboration and just get to know the work that we're all doing together. With that, we'll go ahead and get started. And we'll get started by first and foremost acknowledging that we reside and organize on the unceded ancestral homelands of the Chumash people, who are the original stewards of this land, and who for thousands of years and still today have lived in deep relationship with this land despite colonization, missionization, systemic erasure. They remain preserving their language, culture, sovereignty, and the harms they've endured of displacement, forced labor, cultural suppression, and attempted erasure are part of the same systems of injustice that we organize against today. The Fund for Santa Barbara is committed to being active allies and solidarity with the Chumash people. We honor Indigenous knowledge, center Indigenous leadership, invest in reparative action, and support Chumash-led initiatives. We recognize our shared responsibility as stewards of the land, water, and all living beings, and we invite our partners to ground themselves in Indigenous wisdom and to commit to actions rooted in accountability and solidarity. And with that, let's go ahead and dive in. Today, we'll be providing a brief overview of the fund, as well as the Racial Equity Grant, which you may hear me often call REG. That's just abbreviated Racial Equity Grant. We'll go over the funding model and the folks who make the funding decisions. We'll review the funding guidelines and the priorities. We'll do an in-depth walkthrough of the grant application and the cycle timeline, and then we'll have time for Q&A at the end. But again, you're welcome to ask questions at any point throughout the presentation if that feels comfortable and natural to you. By the end, we hope that you'll have a clear sense of whether the Racial Equity Grant is the right fit for your request. And with that, I'll hand it off to Danielle to talk about the fund.
All right, thank you, Tanya. So a little bit about the history of the fund. The fund was founded in 1980 and has been around for 40 years. And our mission is to advance progressive change by strengthening movements for economic, environmental, political, racial, and social justice. Our founders were activists and advocates involved in social justice movements who again and again encountered a common barrier, which was that traditional foundations were not supporting the kind of progressive activist-led work they were engaged in. So unable to find a community-led foundation that aligned with their values and vision, they decided to create one themselves. And so the Fund for Santa Barbara was born. And there are three key things that make the fund different from traditional foundations. So the first is that we're a fundraising nonprofit. Unlike most foundations that have large endowments, we fundraise our grant-making budget annually. And we do have a small endowment, but we are not simply an invested pool of funds. We take a lot of pride in the fact that we support the support we receive from our individual donors is fundraised annually. And we also believe in asking tough questions when accepting private dollars to ensure that their contributions come without strings attached. This allows us to remain independent and focused on our mission. And also our fundraising model keeps us connected to the reality of what it's like to fundraise, just like the organizations that we support. And this is why during the 2008 recession, we doubled our grant making. And in 2020, at the height of the pandemic, we tripled our emerging needs grant budget. This year, in response to federal budget cuts and widespread grant freezes, we increased our grant making again and released over $1 million in just the first 6 months. We're continually seeking ways to make our grant making more impactful and responsive to the evolving needs of the communities we support. And the second thing to know is that we are unabashedly progressive. We do not pretend to be neutral. Our motto is change, not charity. So it's not something that we have against charity. We think that charity is absolutely critical, but we are strong believers that social conditions improve most when those who have been denied power and justice lead efforts to confront challenge and change the conditions that have excluded them from equity and justice. And so for this reason, requests based on direct service models are generally not the best fit for the racial equity grant or the fund in general. Our mission is to advance social change by supporting initiatives that address the root causes of social inequities. And lastly, it's important to note that our funding decisions are guided by an activist-led model grounded in lived experience and community voices. In our funding model, donors and staff defer funding decisions to activists and community leaders, which leads us to our grant-making committee. So our decision-making model is led by the local activists and leaders, ensuring that decisions are made with, not for the community. The GMC represents the entire county from north to south and offers a range of expertise and firsthand knowledge on issues that affect our communities. And they are community activists deeply rooted in the work connected to the issues and guided by an of, by, and for approach to supporting historically marginalized communities. It's important to note that this is your audience when submitting a grant proposal to us, and this model allows fund staff to be able to provide technical support to applicants, which we'll be talking about shortly. And with that, I'll pass it to Tanya.
Thanks, Danielle. Very quickly, we also wanted to share the strategies with which we advance our mission. The first is, of course, grant making, what we're best known for and why you're here today. But there are other ways that we support groups aside from funding. And the main being that we also build capacity of progressive organizations to help them be bold and effective. And this is one that I really do like to highlight for folks. Our capacity building program commits non-monetary resources and staff time to support grassroots organizations with skill building opportunities, convenings, informational resources, and free tailored one-on-one consulting. And we encourage you to learn more about our capacity building program and take advantage of our offerings. Danielle just dropped the link to the capacity building program website, as well as the email to our capacity building manager who, like I mentioned, is available to do free tailored one-on-one consulting that can address your very specific needs to whatever issues your organization may be grappling with. We also nurture coalitions by being a hub for convening collaborative efforts and serving as a trusted table to convene people and groups for strategy, resource sharing, and inspiration. We work to influence philanthropy by advocating for more progressive approaches to philanthropy to support community organizing, advocacy, and movement building. And finally, we engage in leadership development so that social justice movements and the progressive philanthropy sector look like the communities we serve, which is diverse, intergenerational, and values-driven. And we have a picture there of our Youth Making Change program, which which is where we teach you young people to be philanthropists and grant makers, and it is currently in its 17th year. We're going to switch gears now and dive into the racial equity grant. And starting off with the history, the Racial Equity Grant of the County of Santa Barbara is a community-driven initiative born directly out of the grassroots organizing and advocacy efforts led by Healing Justice Santa Barbara, who, in the wake of the 2020 murder of George Floyd and the ongoing racial justice movement, mobilized their supporters to demand that the county invest in the Black community. And as a result of their vision and their advocacy, the Santa Barbara County Board of Supervisors passed a resolution declaring racism a public health crisis, made a commitment to racial justice, and pledged $500,000 to address equity issues within the county. They then allocated these funds internally for institutional equity development within the county. Once Healing Justice heard about this, they once again organized and advocated for the remaining funds to be distributed directly to the community. And as a result of their efforts, and in line with our community-led participatory decision-making model, the fund was selected to distribute the remaining funds. This is now our 5th cycle of the Racial Equity Grant funded by the County of Santa Barbara. This funding program would not be available to you today had it not been for the organizing and advocacy of these fearless leaders. And we are honored to be entrusted with the responsibility of continuing to steward this funding. And a quick note that this funding is not guaranteed long-term. The county annually has to allocate and approve the budget for it. And so if you feel inclined, I would encourage you to talk to your supervisors to ask them to continue to support and increase funding for this grant program. The Racial Equity Grant mission. Crafting the mission was an intentional and collaborative process shaped through deep engagement between grant-making committee members and community stakeholders. And earlier, Danielle said that we at the fund are unabashedly progressive, and that is true, but sometimes bureaucracy makes the unabashedly part difficult, and it took a lot of strategy and sometimes uncomfortable compromises to get us here today. But rooted in the vision of the activists who inspired it, the mission of the Racial Equity Grant is to invest in and strengthen organizations advancing anti-racism through systems change strategies across Santa Barbara County. The goal of this program is to influence both the culture and policy to drive systemic change necessary to advance racial equity and justice while actively working to address the legacy of slavery and the ongoing impacts of racism in Santa Barbara County. Those of you who have applied for funding through the fund for our other programs may notice that this mission of this funding program is much more specific. This focus was intentionally crafted to honor the community advocates' original request, as well as the history of the program and the leadership of those who made this opportunity possible. And we hope that this program is the first of many such investments on the path of reversing the legacy and effects of racism. The Racial Equity Grants has several objectives, and they are clearly defined and also intentionally designed to honor the original demands of the community advocates. The objectives are intended to help you as applicants assess whether your proposal aligns with the goals and priorities of the Racial Equity Grant. We are looking to provide organizational capacity assistance, or organizational capacity assistance is a key objective of the program. And what this means is providing support to strengthen the ecosystem of diverse anti-racism organizations in the community that share a common goal to address the cultural and systemic effects of racism. There's an emphasis here on working together towards a common goal that can include collaborative efforts, coalition building, and supporting groups that are working together towards anti-racism goals. The other is increase active participation in historically marginalized communities to influence civic matters that impact our community at large. And this includes efforts ranging from local civic engagement to broader initiatives beyond our immediate community, as long as they demonstrate meaningful impact within the region locally. Another key objective is to develop the pipeline that uplifts historically marginalized leaders into positions of decision making and influence. A significant aspect of racial inequity in the county is tied to who holds leadership positions and the distribution of power. And addressing this imbalance is essential for advancing racial equity and ensuring that diverse voices are represented in decision making spaces. Um, the other is increasing and sustaining investment in organizations led by historically marginalized minority leaders who have traditionally lacked access to capital. This means addressing the inequities that exist within the philanthropic sector, where organizations led by people of color often face significant disparities in access to funding. By correcting these imbalances, we hope to help ensure that these organizations are better resourced to serve the communities and drive lasting, meaningful social change. We have two more, but one, as you can see, has several points within it. The next is address and work to change the systemic negative narratives about the legacy of slavery in the community. That's a critical part of this initiative. Much of this effort stems from confronting anti-Blackness and the enduring legacies of racism within Santa Barbara County's culture and communities, issues that have often gone unaddressed and unchallenged for too long. By acknowledging and dismantling these harmful narratives, we can begin to heal and build a more equitable and inclusive future. And lastly, the Racial Equity Grant aims to establish and advance organizational capacity in historically marginalized organizations in the following areas: leadership development, advocacy, policy change, legal analysis, and research. A quick note here that direct advocacy or lobbying is not allowed with racial equity grant funding, but educational awareness on key issues, legal strategies, um, and things like that are. If you have specific questions regarding your request's alignment with advocacy or policy change or legal strategies, please feel free to ask questions, either personally message us or send us an email, and we can talk about that offline if you prefer. We're happy to chat about it and clear up any confusion. And then moving on is strategic communication, alliance and coalition building, which I know I've now said a few times, so I know folks are probably hearing that and thinking about that. Organizational development, community engagement and organizing, which is a big one. Innovation and continuous learning, and develop organizational and programmatic objectives, conduct evaluations, and assess outcomes. So these are all to strengthen these organizations that have historically been marginalized. And this list isn't exhaustive, but we hope it'll help in determining the type of work that the REG funds. And then a quick note here is at this point, I would provide information about all of our other funding program offerings, but I do want to keep this short for you all. And so I will simply encourage you to sign up for our listserv so that you don't miss any future funding opportunities that become available. Danielle has already dropped that in the chat so that you can sign up to receive our emails. And then another great resource for folks who are looking for other grant opportunities is the Nonprofit Resource Center. They have I don't even know what to call it, a database of grant opportunities that they update regularly, and it outlines the grants that are available in the county throughout the year. So it's a good resource for you all to take a look at and see what other funding opportunities are available for the work that you're doing. And I will hand it off to Danielle to talk about the funding guidelines.
All right, thanks, Tanya. So getting into the funding guidelines, um, all applicants must meet these funding guidelines to be eligible for consideration. These criteria apply for all funding programs. So your request should address or align with at least one. Strong requests will align with multiple, and for the racial equity grant request should align with these and have a strong anti-racism component, as Tanya just covered. These tie back to our mission to advance progressive change efforts that address the root cause of social inequities. So we invite proposals that actively support anti-discrimination of all types. This list is not exhaustive. We invite applications that actively support the elimination of all forms of discrimination. Social justice issues are not monolithic, and we encourage proposals that are intersectional and inclusive. Proposals should actively support marginalized communities to engage in actions actions that seek to counter social injustice. So an example of this would be providing trainings and resources to empower marginalized communities to organize protests, advocate for policy changes, and raise awareness to affect change on issues that directly affect them. Proposals should actively work to improve the rights of marginalized workers and their families. They should promote the cultural life of underserved communities and support the activities of cultural workers. So examples include Juneteenth celebrations and MLK events in Santa Barbara, Santa Maria, and Lompoc, each of which play a vital role in preserving and promoting their cultural heritage. Proposals should promote self-determination and leadership development in low-income and disenfranchised communities. They should promote global peace and organize just policies. They should work on building coalitions to improve environmental justice and address climate change, especially organizing a constituency usually without access to decision makers. We are committed to removing barriers and providing support to grassroots groups working together so that communities most affected and typically excluded from decision making have a voice in shaping policies. Proposals should engage in collaborative action and coalition building to strengthen movement ecosystems. We believe that a key component of real change is building a movement, pooling resources, sharing strategies, and organizing joint campaigns strengthens the collective impact and fosters a unified movement. We strongly support coalition building and cross-movement solidarity at the fund. Proposals should work against community violence and support restorative justice initiatives. And finally, we invite proposals that operate in a democratic manner, responsive to and directed by the constituency being served. The grant-making committee will be looking for proposals where those directly impacted by injustices are actively involved in strategy building and decision-making, ensuring that their needs, voices, and priorities guide the direction of the work. And then if you would like, we have shared the funding guidelines and priorities in the chat. And with that, back to Tanya. You are on mute, Tanya, as a note.
Just here talking to myself. So I was saying by now you've heard us emphasize our goal to advance social change and fund systems change work, but you may still be wondering like what that means. And so at the fund, we define social change as efforts that address the systemic root causes of social inequities, not only to alleviate those inequities, but also to transform the underlying conditions and structures that create and sustain them. The goal is to alter the systems and the structures that determine how power, resources, and opportunities are distributed in society. And this, in contrast to direct service or charity, where the focus is on addressing immediate needs of the individual or a small group using short-term tangible solutions rather than working to change the underlying structures or conditions or policies that create those needs. And while direct services are critical for providing relief, systems change aims to address the root causes of the issues to prevent the need for these services in the future. That's how we differentiate between direct services and then systems change or social change, which is what we fund. And then you heard Danielle say earlier that our motto is change, not charity. So that's to give you all an idea of what we mean by that. Are there any questions? All right. If anyone has any questions, remember, feel free to come off mute at any point or drop them in the chat.
Okay, getting into our funding priorities, the GMC uses the funding priorities to guide their proposal review and base their funding assessment. So first they look at adherence to the funding guidelines. They want to know, does this project have the potential to advance movements for social, economic, political, racial, and/or environmental change? And then they'll prioritize projects with elements of community organizing, lobbying, direct action, base building, coalition building, or legal strategy. They want to know, does this project address the root cause of an issue? They'll look at access to funding and prioritize grassroots organizing groups that use strategies that are typically overlooked by mainstream philanthropy, like legal strategies, lobbying, and direct action, primarily focusing on systems change work. So they'll take into consideration whether the nature of the project is so new or controversial that its chances of receiving funding elsewhere are limited. They'll also consider critical timing and need, assessing whether the organization has the necessary resources, skills, and connections to achieve its social change objectives. They'll consider the impact of funds, assessing the clarity, alignment, and effectiveness of the project's budget in relation to its social change objectives and overall sustainability. And finally, they'll consider regional equity, focusing on the fair distribution of resources with consideration of regional disparities. And then getting into what we do not fund, political campaigns that support a candidate or political party, private interests, direct labor organizing, projects providing direct services without a social change component. Again, our motto is change, not charity. We don't fund direct support to individuals, building improvements, capital ventures, i.e. like vehicles, etc. Office equipment like machines and computers, and projects located outside of Santa Barbara County. And you should note that the RAG funding cannot be used for lobbying, legal strategy, or 501c4 type work. However, 501c4 organizations doing C3 type work can apply. And with that, I'm going to pass back to Tanya to talk about eligibility criteria.
Thanks, Danielle. So with this set of eligibility criteria is very specific to the racial equity grant and must be met for consideration. Applicants must be a historically marginalized organization and serving community members directly harmed by racist policies and marginalized by systemic racism. Must include as a core mission of the organization the goal of addressing systemic racism. Projects must also take place within Santa Barbara County. And then organizations or groups must have a tax ID number if applying as a tax exempt organization, or if applying as an unincorporated group, must have an EIN. Or you can also apply as a fiscally sponsored organization as well. And then depending on which avenue you're taking, you'll also need to have an organizational bank account or use a fiscal sponsor's bank account. Let's take a quick look at the cycle timeline that we're on right now. So we opened the request for proposals on September 10th. And then obviously today is the grant application workshop. The fund offers an optional draft application review, which I will be covering on the next slide. But for now, just note that the deadline to take advantage of this optional opportunity is December 1st by 5 p.m. A week after that, the request for proposals will close on December 8th. I strongly encourage folks to submit well before the deadline. We have quite a bit of time until December 8th. And so if you're able to get that request in before then, I encourage you to do so. And then grant decisions will be announced in March of next year. And then funds will be dispersed in April of next year. The funding term for this grant program will be from April 2026 to March 2027. There will be a grant award celebration where everyone, regardless of funding decision, is invited to attend, and that will be next summer in Solvang. We don't have the date yet, but you will, especially if you have registered for our listserv to be receiving our emails, you will be notified of that. And again, that is open to the public. So regardless of funding decision, you all are invited and welcome to attend. And then after that, there are two reports that are due with this funding program. A progress report will be due in September, and then a final report will be due next March, or next March, so March 2027, at the conclusion of the funding term. Now, the optional proposal review that I mentioned, again, is completely optional, but it is an opportunity for prospective applicants to take advantage if you are looking to get some feedback on your proposed request. And in order to take advantage of this opportunity, you can submit a one-page max summary of your proposal, a list of key participants, and a draft of your budget. And this can be submitted anytime between now and December 1st at 5 p.m. via email. The email is grants@fundforsantabarbara.org. And I don't encourage folks to submit it on December 1st. Likely I will have a few to review, and so then you'll only have 5 days to get the feedback and then incorporate it back into what you want to submit. But between now and December 1st, take advantage of this opportunity if it seems like a good option for you. We'd be happy to provide that technical assistance. So let's go ahead and dive into the application. And the application lives on our grants portal, which is submittable. And it is an entirely electronic application process that I'm going to walk you through accessing in a moment. But before I do, I wanted to touch on a couple things. And first, I wanted to say that you will be required to create a free account, and I'm encouraging folks to create the account using the email address that is linked to the organization that you're submitting the request for, and have it be an email address that you check regularly. This email address will be our primary point of contact with you throughout the life cycle of your grant. And just a quick note that the grants platform is not supported by Internet Explorer, but anything else, Google Chrome, Firefox, Safari, will be just fine. And if you find the application to not be accessible to your specific accessibility needs for any reason at all and would like some technical assistance, please do not hesitate to reach out. We are more than happy to troubleshoot and work with folks to make things accessible. We do not want there to be any barriers to this application process whatsoever. With that, let's go ahead and dive in. So I think by now you all have visited our website. You registered for tonight's workshop, so you recognize this page. To apply, you would come here to the Apply Now button. This is going to redirect you to Submittable. If you once you click on that button, you are now looking at our portal. The first thing you're going to see when you click apply is going to be the fund's mission, funding guidelines, and priorities. If you scroll down to the bottom, you're going to see the option to apply for any current funding opportunities. Right now, we actually have two open. We have the racial equity grant, which is why you all are here, but we also have the youth making change grant application open for another week. And so this is one that is available for youth-led initiatives and any organizations that have a youth component. If this sounds like something that is maybe you haven't heard about it but are interested in, please let me know. I'm happy to share more information about this. The deadline for this is Friday, October 17th, so you have a little bit of time. The application isn't extremely long, and I can share more about that. Now, you're going to click on, or your focus is going to be on the racial equity grant. If you click on guidelines, you're going to see the specific mission, history, and objectives of the racial equity grant here. And if you click on apply, at this point, if you're not logged in, it's going to ask you to log in or create an account if you haven't done that. I was already logged in, so it just automatically took me over to the organization or to the application. The first thing it's going to ask you to do is to identify your organization. If you are a tax exempt organization or applying with a fiscal sponsor, you're going to input the EIN of the tax ID number. I'm using the fund's tax ID number here. You're going to click search organizations. Here you'll see the Fund for Santa Barbara. I'm going to click select and continue. If you are an unincorporated group, you're going to bypass this step by clicking skip and continue. Only unincorporated groups should be skipping this. Anyone else who is a tax exempt organization or applying with a fiscal sponsor should be utilizing this space to identify their organization. Now, I've now been linked to the Fund for Santa Barbara. We are in the application now. As you see, the racial equity mission, history, and objectives will remain here for the duration of the application process. You'll see at first, well, you'll see the organization that you're applying on behalf of, which, like I said, it's the Fund for Santa Barbara for me. Excuse me. As you continue to scroll down, you'll see the form name, which is, Racial Equity Grant of the County of Santa Barbara. It's the application 2026. I also want you to note that because this is, what is the word I'm looking for? I can't find the word. But what I meant to say was that this little human person here is, if you click on that, it allows you to invite collaborators. So this is where you would come in and enter the email of your colleagues or anyone who's going to be supporting you with this application. You'll enter their emails and then click invite, and they'll get access to be able to collaborate with you on this application in real time so that you can work on it together. Moving down, you'll see the funding term is, as I mentioned, April 2026 to March 2027. There's a application checklist, which is a tool that we've created to help you gather any necessary documents that you'll need in order to submit a complete application. And then you can also click here to open up the racial equity grant of the County of Santa Barbara's kind of FAQ, which covers a lot of what I've already covered in the presentation tonight. But just know that you have those resources available to you as you are completing the application. They never go away. They'll be with you the whole time. So if at any point you need to access those, you can just scroll to the beginning of the application and find them there. Now, getting started with the application itself, I do still want to highlight a couple other things. One is required items are going to be marked in red here. They're going to say required. Word limits are always going to be on the bottom right corner of the text input box. And then we also have clues scattered throughout the application that are going to be in this like lighter gray color. These are clues that are meant to help you kind of decipher a little bit further what it is that the question is asking. So the first section here is covering general information about the applicant organization and the funding request. So the first question itself is asking you to start with an executive summary of your proposal. Um, and this will be used to help introduce reviewers to your request. Now, here is something that you should know, and that is that you do not have to answer the questions in order. And in fact, I encourage you to come back to draft this executive summary at the end of your proposal drafting, because it'll be much easier for you to draft the summary once you've already completed the proposal and you know what is in there. You don't have to go in order, so you can come back to do this at the end. And when you do this part, I want to encourage you to answer the 4 questions that are being asked in paragraph form. Don't do them in numbered form. I know sometimes it's easy to see like 1, 2, 3, 4, and then folks are and you get caught up, and so you start doing, oh well, 1, 2, 3, 4. We want to see this in third person present tense paragraph form, as you can see from this clue here. Let me actually, while I'm in here, zoom in a little bit for folks. There we go. So clues down here will tell you. And what I'm saying to you now is actually in here as well. You're encouraged to draft this after you've completed the request narrative, which is the meatier part of the application. Moving down, you're gonna be asked about the primary contact information. This is the submitter. This is the originator, owner of the form, the application. This isn't gonna be the collaborator. So note that earlier when I mentioned about collaborators, the initial owner is going to be the only person that's going to be able to submit the application. So before you go ahead and invite collaborators, make sure that the main person who is the main contact for this proposal and for submitting the application is the person who initiates the form, and then collaborators are invited on, because only the initial person is going to be able to submit the application. And so here where we're asking for submitter name, submitter information, you're going to want that to be the same person who initiated the form, not one of the collaborators. And this will also be the individual that will serve as the primary point of contact for all proposal related communications between us and your group or organization. Moving further down, we're going to ask questions about the organization. The first is asking you to enter the legal name of your organization or group as it appears in the IRS exempt organization list. If you are an unincorporated group, you won't have that. So then just use the legal name that you've been using for your bank account and things of that nature. We'll ask you for a request name. This is just asking you to give your request a name, and it can be very simple. It can be something like general operating support for X. Or, you know, if it's a specific project, then give us the name of your project. And then we'll ask you if your organization has tax exempt status, 501c3 or 501c4. If you do, you can say yes and then follow those prompts. If you do not, you say no, and then we'll ask you if you're applying as a fiscally sponsored group. If you are and you have a fiscal sponsor, then you can say yes and then follow those prompts. And if you do not and you are not, then you can say no. And then for today, because I'm applying as the fund, I'll just say that I do have fiscal tax exempt status and I'm a 501c3. And because we already entered the fund's EIN, tax exempt status or tax ID number, you see that it auto-populated here, and that'll be the case for you as well. Then we'll ask you for the legal name on your organization's bank account. This is the payee name. So for example, for us, it would be, you know, the fund for Santa Barbara. This isn't asking for your bank name. I know that sometimes folks have gotten confused and put like Montecito Bank and Trust, for example. So this is asking for the actual name that your bank account is under. Next, it's going to ask you for your organization's Bill.com payment network ID. Notice that this is not a required field. It does not say required. And so if you do not have a Bill.com payment network ID, you can leave this blank. We use Bill.com for electronic payments. But if you don't have that and you don't want to establish that, that is absolutely okay. We also mail out paper checks. Moving further along, we'll ask for your organization's address. We want to know where your organization is located. And then we'll ask you if your organization receives correspondence at this address. If you do, you can say yes and move on. If you don't, you can say no, and then we'll ask you for your organization's mailing address, which could be a PO box or whatever that is. And then we'll ask you for your phone, and then we'll also ask for your website and social media handle. But again, notice that those are not required. If you do not have a website or a social media handle, that is okay. We don't expect you to have that. We recognize that our main constituency, or who we aim to fund, is grassroots groups, and we don't expect grassroots groups to have all of this information. Moving further down, Diane, I see your question in the chat. Can organizations located outside of Santa Barbara apply? Organizations located outside of Santa Barbara can apply, but the work has to be taking place within Santa Barbara County. And with the racial equity grant, because it is funded by the County of Santa Barbara, it is even stricter, meaning that we are really going to be looking at where the work is taking place, and it has to be taking place within Santa Barbara County. Next is the request information section. Here, we'll ask you to specify the amount you're requesting and provide additional details about your request. We'll ask you about the type of request. You'll need to indicate whether the specific type of request that you're making. And if you've been funded before, we'll ask you to give us the date of your last grant. And we'll also ask you for the total budget of your specific request. So, if it's general operating support, or program project, and has this request been funded by in the past? If you say yes, then we'll ask you when was the last time it was funded, and if it hasn't, then you can just say no and move on. Total request budget. So total request budget is going to pertain to the total amount that this request is costing. So let's say you're requesting funding for a specific project, and you're requesting $50,000 from us, but you know that this project, in order to carry it out, is actually costing $130,000. So the amount requesting, here you would put $50,000, but the total request budget in order to execute the project is $130,000. And then your organization's annual operating budget, that's your organization's total operating budget. And a quick note here that it's not your fiscal sponsor's annual operating budget. It's your group's. And another quick note here that if your type of request is general operating support, then we look at the request of general operating support as that being your organization. So your total request budget and your organization's annual operating budget are going to be the same, because we are looking at the general operating support as the project, if you will, being your organization. And then we'll ask you for your fiscal year start, whether that's in January or July. I know folks are on different calendars. Moving further down, we'll ask you to be specific about the issue areas that you're addressing. We'll ask you to pick the top 5 issue areas that this request will seek to address. You can select from this list, or if the issue areas that you are addressing are not on this list, you can come down here, click on other, and then list them out here, um, and then separate using commas. Same thing with the strategies that you're going to be employing. Click on other using that, and then geography and constituency, same thing. For the geography, if your request is going to be supporting constituents countywide, meaning it's going to be supporting the entire county, then you can just click on countywide and move on. However, if your request is specific to a specific area within the county, for example, North County, then you can select North County, and then we'll ask you what parts of North County specific, and it can be, Santa Maria or Guadalupe, or if there's other areas that are not listed, you can click other and then tell us what those areas are. We're getting very close here. So next, and this is where really the meat and bones of the proposal are, is the request narrative. For this portion, we really want you to focus on answering the specific questions that are being asked and provide detailed answers. I encourage you to break down each question and directly address it, and avoid the inclusion of any information that may confuse the grant making committee. Remember that they have to read all of the applications, and you don't want them to have to sift through a lot of unnecessary details to have to understand your request. Your goal is to make it easy for them to clearly articulate why they support your proposal. And for best practices, use language that non-experts can easily understand and avoid jargon and acronyms. And then there's a note here, each question has a word limit, so pay attention to those as well. First, we're gonna ask about your organizational history and mission. This is your opportunity to give us the background information and lay out the foundation for your request. Remember that the REG funding eligibility applicant organizations must demonstrate that addressing systemic racism is a core part of their mission, or is a mission of the organization. Next, we'll ask you to articulate how the request aligns with the Racial Equity Grant's mission, objectives, and priorities, and how your organization is addressing systemic racism. Here, you'll want to ensure that you fully understand the REG's guidelines, objectives, and eligibility requirements, and clearly outline the strategies you are currently employing or plan to implement to address systemic racism. Be explicit about how this request is going to address systemic racism. The grant-making committee will prioritize projects that are addressing systemic racism and promote anti-racism systemic change. And then pay attention to those clues. They're going to be scattered throughout the application. Next, we'll ask you to describe how the funds will be used to enhance and address the root causes of issues impacting historically marginalized and disenfranchised community members. Again, remember the grant-making committee is looking to support projects with a strong systemic social change component. And so here you'll want to connect the dots between the social change of your request and how you are addressing the root causes of the issues. And then if you are working with community partners, we'll ask you to talk about those relationships and what the key components are. And this question is just asking you to show that you know the other players in the field. And we're not being prescriptive about requiring collaboration, but it is valuable to be aware of what other community organizations are focusing on to avoid duplicating efforts and foster more effective unified work. Next, we'll ask you to describe your organizational structure and governance. And here, remember that the grant-making committee members will prioritize constituency-led work and requests with community buy-in. So here you'll want to talk about how involved your constituency is in the decision-making process and how they are leaders in the work. Next, we'll ask you to give us an activity timeline. And a good way to differentiate between objectives and activities is The objectives is what you're going to do or hope to accomplish, and the activities are how you're actually going to do them. The activities should help you achieve your objectives, and the activities and objectives should support the narrative of your proposal. Also, as you're completing your activity timeline, you should be thinking about your budget because your budget is your activities just in a different form. It's your budget but in money. Um, so we'll ask you to enter those, and then we'll ask you what the anticipated outcomes and how you will evaluate the effectiveness of or impact of the request within your proposed timeline. For this question, think about what is going to be different by virtue of you carrying out this request and outline the specific outcomes you expect to see. Make the outcomes measurable and explain how you will evaluate whether your outcomes have been achieved. Um, Evaluation can be simple. It does not have to be elaborate. Just clarify who will benefit from the request and detail how. And of course, be clear, be realistic, and be feasible. Next is the financial information section. First, we'll ask you what resources aside from funding your organization has access to and needs. Here you'll want to describe the methods or approaches your organization uses to raise funds. And sorry, I got lost here. And be specific about how each strategy contributes to meeting your goals. And on the flip side of that is what resources aside from funding does your organization need? Remember that I mentioned earlier, we have different strategies that we use to advance our mission, and those include capacity building and influencing philanthropy. So we take what we learn from our applicants and our partners, and we try to either talk to other foundations and say, hey, this is what people are saying that they need, or when our capacity building program is building out its programming for next year, we look at what folks are requesting or what they're in need of, and we will try to build programming around that. So be explicit. Let us know what folks are needing so that we can try to address those needs. Next is the financial information table. This is where you're gonna, again, translate your activities into dollars. And here is where I mentioned earlier, I recommend maintaining a running sheet as you're identifying your activities that you plan to undertake, detailing the specific requirements and the associated costs. This table is divided into two sections. Section 1 is for recording the income sources, and section 2 is for recording the expenses. The amount column here, these two are set to auto sum. And for this functionality to properly work, you must avoid using special characters. So just numbers, no periods, no number signs, no commas, just the numbers itself, and the table will auto do the math for you. I have a pre-filled sample for a general operating support request that we'll go over together, and it's something that you will always have access to as you're filling it out. So let's look at that. Let me zoom in. So this is a sample, as I said, for a general operating support request. In the income section, you're going to include all monetary funding sources related to the specific request, along with the expected dates for each funding source. The first line in the income section is pre-filled with the funds information, and so you'll just add the month and year anticipated. And in this case, as I mentioned, it's going to be April 2026 is when we're going to be distributing the funds for the racial equity grant. For the amount, input the specific amount that you are requesting. So whatever the proposal amount that you're submitting for. And remember that this table should only include information directly related to your request. So this is for general operating support, but if you're just submitting for a specific program or project, then it should only include financial information related to that program or project. In this sample, like I said, because it's general rating support, I'm going to add all the funding sources for my organization, which you can see I've listed there. In the yellow up here, you'll find examples of potential funding sources that you may choose to include, along with any others that you have that I didn't have in here. I also have hints that are listed in red here. And then again, remember that I know that this can be a little bit misleading because there's periods and numbers, but remember, just add numbers and this total amount here will auto sum itself. Now, in the bottom section, the expenses section, there's also possible expense categories that I've included for you, as well as ways to note that. The main thing here is use the notes and explanation column here to your advantage. The more information that you give the grant making committee, the less questions they'll have when reviewing your proposal. Down here, this amount match verification is a way for you to make sure that things are being input correctly. It should balance itself out to 0. The total income should match the total expenses. So here you'll see that I've included a total income for this organization of $190,000 and change, and the total expenses is matching that. And so this is automatically calculating itself and aligning at 0. Thank you, Juan. Okay. All right. Are there any questions in the budget here sample that I can answer before flipping back into the application? And again, remember, this is a sample that is linked in the application that you will have access to at any point that will hopefully help guide you as you're completing your financial information table. Okay, if there are no questions, I'm going to flip back, but remember, you're welcome to come off mute and ask questions or put them in the chat at any point. And that again is linked right here. And remember, I mentioned there's clues distributed throughout this application. So before you move forward, you'll need to verify that the total income and total expense amounts match. And again, that's total income here should match total expense amount here. And this will automatically balance itself out at 0. And this question here is asking you to verify that that is happening. And you'll say yes, hopefully. And if you say no, it'll actually ask you to go back and correct the errors. And typically it will not be working because you added a $sign or a comma somewhere or a period. So if you are struggling with that and you find that you're having that issue, look for those special characters that might be hiding in there, because that might remedy that situation. And then it'll ask you to confirm that the sum total requested from the fund does not exceed $100,000 and matches the requested amount for this proposal. So that's this number here, the amount requested from the fund. This number here should not exceed $100,000 and should amount to the amount that you are submitting this request for. Earlier, I had made an arbitrary number of $50,000. So if my request was for $50,000, then this number would be $50,000 here. And then I could come down here and say, yes, that is true. And then finally, we'll ask you to identify the key areas or expenses in your budget that are most critical. And we'll ask you to add these in order of priority with the highest priority item at the top. And you can do that here. We'll also ask you for past funding sources, and this just helps us understand funding trends. finally, the additional information section is a section that will differ depending on whether you are a tax-exempt group or a fiscally sponsored group or an unincorporated group. Use that application checklist that I mentioned is linked at the beginning of the application to figure out what information you're going to need. Right now, what you're seeing is the information that is needed for tax-exempt organizations, but I will name what would change if we were applying as something else. So everyone will be asked to submit a list of key participants involved with their request. And then a list of the board of directors for tax-exempt groups, or a list of the governing body for unincorporated groups. Now, if you are applying as an fiscally sponsored group, we'll also ask for a list of the board of directors of the fiscal sponsor. And then we'll ask you if at least half of your organization's leadership reflects the community that you serve in any of the following respects, and you can select which apply, or click on other and tell us which others apply to your leadership makeup. There's that list of board of directors that I mentioned. Now, if you are applying as an unincorporated group, we will ask you to provide a statement of charitable purpose, and that is just a statement that is drafted because you are not a tax-exempt organization, indicating that you are a group that is unincorporated but working with a charitable purpose. And then we'll ask you, and then we wouldn't, if you are unincorporated, we wouldn't ask you for tax-exempt determination letters because you wouldn't have them. In this case, again, we're looking at what it would look like for a tax-exempt organization, and so we would be asking for your IRS tax-exempt determination letter. There is a sample here in case you're wondering what that letter is. This is the letter we're looking for. And then we're also going to be asking you for a copy of your state of California franchise tax board determination letter. And again, we have a sample linked here so you know exactly what letter that is that we're looking for. And then we'll ask you for your organization logo. This is one of those that is not required. So if you do not have an organization logo, don't worry, you can leave this blank, go ahead and skip it and move on. And then finally, we'll ask you to upload an optional attachment. And actually, you get to select up to 3 files, and they can vary. It can be a document, it could be a PDF, it could be a presentation, it could be a recording, it could be a video, it could be various different formats. All of the acceptable files are listed here. And the goal of this is to choose something or that will help the grant making committee better understand your organization or your request. The last part of the application is where we'll ask you to certify that the information you provided in the application is true and accurate to the best of your knowledge and is being submitted with the board of directors' full acknowledgement and endorsement. And so you'll enter your information as the submitter, and then we'll ask you to send this acknowledgement request to a member of the board of directors. So if you're tax exempt, it's going to go to your board president or your board treasurer. If you are a fiscally sponsored organization, it's going to go to the board president or the treasurer of the fiscal sponsor. And if you are an unincorporated group, it's going to go to another group lead from your governing body who has that privilege to be able to attest to that. This is one of those that does not have to be sent at the very end. You can send this at any point. And I would say don't wait until the very last minute to send this, because you want folks to be able to submit this before the deadline closes so that your application is considered complete. And that is also listed here. And then we've made it to the end. There's two options here. You can always scroll down to the bottom here to save a draft at any point. Um, if you're, we have a couple months before the deadline, and so if you've been working on it in short bursts and you need to save and log off, you can always save a draft and then come back to it whenever you want to. Or when you are ready and you've completed the application, you can come here and click on apply, and it would submit it and then redirect you to our Fun for Santa